Well, good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Kenneth Lang here with Lisa Rangel of Chameleon Resumes. And I have to confess, when I started the clock before, I forgot to do the go live. So for the first 15 seconds, I was wondering what was going on. But it's really great to have Lisa here today. And Lisa, we have never met in person, but we are so close to each other here in New Jersey. And I think,
Go Jersey.
yeah, go Jersey, right? The only place where we can still pump our own, have get people to pump our gas for us, which no one
Amen.
totally understands. But I remember, and we were talking before, there are people that I've met from New Jersey, and like Alex, and we both love Alex dearly very much, and others. And I look forward to the chance when we're all going to be able to get out there again and actually do some more in person networking. So, when you have a chance and you do this, just log into the chat. Just I see Deborah's here from Midtown East. I can see but not hear you. Well, can you hear me, Lisa?
I can hear you.
Okay, we
I
got
can
Hannah
see
Morgan.
Deborah's comments. I can see
Yeah.
Hannah. Hi, Hannah.
Yes.
Hi,
Hannah.
Deborah.
So I think what we were looking to do today is just have a very general conversation. And one of the things that we talked about, which is very much in the news now, it's what's going on with Better.com. And for those that may not be familiar with it, last week, well, Better.com, I believe they're a mortgage company, um, and they laid off 900 people last week, which in and of itself is upsetting right before the holidays. But what made it even worse was they laid off 900 people at one time, and it was virtual because not everyone was in the office, and it was done through a Zoom call. The owner gave it a 3-minute call. He told them they were being laid off. Right after the call, they shut off all their digital access and they were out. And I think the challenge, besides the fact that it was publicized and the video was out there, was that people didn't know about it because they were out of the office, they were on vacation, they had no way of knowing it was coming. And you and I were talking, Lisa, because you actually had to do something like that a while ago with only 20 or so people.
Yeah.
From the perspective of trying to get it done, it's really hard to kind of do that. So and you did it. So to get a time so everyone knows at the same time and no one is talking to each other, and it's got to be really challenging. I mean, layoffs happen, and I think for me the biggest issue was just the way it was um, done and the fact that it was further publicized. So what do you think about that?
I mean, obviously, I'm not an insider to this story, so any comments or observations I have are just being an outsider. Just I'm not going to say it's empathy, but it's just my ability to maybe put myself in a few different shoes, right? And to see like, okay, what would they be up against as the management? And I tend to be like a pragmatist, and I don't like employers or employees taking on they're out to get me or a victim mindset, right? But with that said, when I had to do this to 20 people in 2008, and it was 20, not 900, and I had to take people into a back office and, tell them what the deal is, and then make sure they're, coordinate with the IT people to make sure their stuff was shut down. And, but you can't shut it down too early, because if they're still at their desk, going to be like, hey, what's going on? So it's like just coordinating it to try to do it in a personal way with just 20 people, in one office, because it wasn't remote at the time. We were all in an office. It was balanced. It was terrible, because you didn't want somebody to find out before. You didn't want their stuff to be shut off before. You didn't want them to download anything, if it wasn't shut off at the right time, because unfortunately people do that, right? Not everybody does it, but people do that, right? So, if they're trying to protect things, if the management's trying to protect things, now you have 900 people, you have remote access. How do you make sure certain people don't find out before others? I can see the perspective. Now, is there a way to maybe, did it need to be 900 at once? Could it have been, pockets of people over time, right? So then at least maybe it wouldn't, that could have been an option. Or, I'm not saying it couldn't have been done better, right? I'm not saying this was great by any stretch of the
For me, for
imagination.
me, for me, it was the fact that someone actually recorded this and put
Well,
it up.
then but that's a damage control issue. Like, I mean, I think they have to assume that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, what's going to be recorded, right? So, I just don't think there was any way they were going to do it well. I think there was going to be somebody who was not happy and documented something that would get out there, and then that's the story. So I think everything was stacked against them in general, but I don't, but they clearly could have done it better. But I can just, from an employer standpoint, having been in recruiting, having been on that side of it, I can see both sides, and it's not a desirable position to be in.
So I think one of the things that goes a little bit alongside that is people have the mindset that this is the time of year that is there aren't any jobs out there. They shouldn't be looking now. They should wait till after the holidays. And I think that's a really bad approach. I think this is, in some cases, one of the better times to be networking, looking for jobs if you know what to do. I mean, do you find that's the case from your experience when you work with people?
When I was a recruiter, and I was a recruiter for 13 years before I opened my resume writing company in 2009, December was always my second, third highest month in the year for fees for placements, because there's a number of reasons. Either companies have budgets they need to use at the end of the year, so they're going to use them. They're going to make sure they get those hires in so they can get them accountable for their budget next year, their headcount for next year, things like that. But I'd say that one of the most actionable reasons why people get hired faster, I think, in December is because recruiters and hiring managers and companies, if they can put off a hire until January or February, they will. Right? Let's face it, everybody wants to go easier around the holidays if they can, because there's already such a crazy time. Mm-hmm. So for that job to be open in December, it is a little bit of a fire drill probably, or a massive opportunity that can't wait till January to be hired for. So it typically, and then because people assume it's slower in hiring, the candidate side of it, you have fewer candidates applying to what are really hot, fillable, going to be filled soon jobs. So the interview process is shorter typically, or can be shorter, because people just want to get this done. And so I'd have the largest, second, third, or fourth largest month of the year, typically in December, when everybody thought it'd be slow. So, and I see it still now. We have clients that are starting, whatever the Monday is after, Christmas, typically, that week in between. We have people who start jobs those days in between Christmas and New Year's. And it's a soft start. It gets people, sort of slowly acclimated, and then they can kind of kick off in January. So it's better to start at the end of December than it is even in January, because by the time January starts, all the melee is already going, right? So
right.
They want people to start sometimes the end of December if it allows people to have a break and things like that, because it just gives them a slow ramp on, and then they're a little bit more acclimated by the time everything kind of kicks into gear for all those corporate initiatives in January.
So from a resume standpoint, do you see changes in how resumes need to be written now versus a few years ago? Certain things or certain mistakes or things that people are making that they don't leverage to make themselves come across better?
Yeah, it's a great question. I did a session with Marty Latman's group last week. I did a session with my own email list last week where we critiqued about 30 different resumes in a private mastermind session. And, high level people, right? Smart, accomplished, move through the ranks people. And I still see the same mistakes, so some of those mistakes, although these aren't new, people are still doing them, are, especially at the senior level, not leading with years of experience. Years of experience don't automatically qualify you for a job, in my opinion. Not to kick us all in the knees, right? Because we all have a lot of experience that we're really proud of. But, we've all worked alongside somebody who had 30 years of experience and didn't know what they were doing. And we've all worked alongside somebody who had maybe 7 years of experience and was awesome, right? So, and vice versa, right? 7 years of experience didn't know their way out of a paper bag, and others that are 30 years of experience and they kick butt. So years of experience don't automatically qualify you. So lead with experience. Don't lead with over 20 years of experience and then complain that you're possibly getting, having ageism used against you. It's like, well, if you're leading with the chin, you can't get mad that you get punched, per se. It's always wrong, right? Ageism is always wrong, but like, let's at least help ourselves out.
So if anyone has any questions,
leading with experience instead of achievements, cramming too much in, not enough white space. Those are common mistakes that I still see people making. Very task-driven resumes, responsibility-driven resumes, and not, again, focusing on the accomplishment, and then making sure that they're keeping the end in mind when they start writing their own document. And by the end in mind is, what job are you going for? Who are you trying to impress? And choose the achievements that are going to be relevant to that reader. Don't just pontificate with what makes you proudest, because what makes you proudest may not be what they're interested in. So you need to also make sure that it's a marketing document. You need to keep in mind what your end user wants and then deliver it to them in an easy way.
Any suggestions for people that are out of work to break up the time? I mean, there was a time when COVID was sort of understood that you're out a few months or so, but do you suggest using volunteer experience to put that at the top? Just calling out the fact that you've been in transition due to COVID? I mean, any specific examples?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am not a fan of the functional resume format where you kind of bury that you have a gap, or you've been unemployed for a little while, or you were home, with your family, or whatever, right? All the reasons people use a functional format to bury the gap, or bury the, maybe you had a lot of jobs over the last 18 months that didn't work out, right? You had 5 jobs, and maybe they were 3 months apiece, and they weren't temp jobs either, right? So maybe you just have that too, right? It could be 100 reasons why you would want to not use a reverse chronological format. But what happens, I'm telling you this from a recruiter's perspective, every time I see a functional resume format, literally it's like instinctive. I can't even help the thought that comes. I'm like, all right, what are they trying to hide? Like, literally, that's where my brain goes as a recruiter. And then I'm looking in the document to go, oh, they're trying to hide the fact that they haven't worked for 8 months, or they've had 3, 2-month jobs in the last, 6 months, or whatever the case may be, right? And none of that stuff, there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. Recruiters are becoming a lot more forgiving, but more importantly, when you do it that way, when you're trying to hide it, it literally subliminally sends this message that you're ashamed of it. And then it makes the recruiter, what else are you trying to hide? Wonder what else you're trying to hide. So I'm a big believer in, reverse chronological format. If you have been volunteering, then just use that volunteer experience as your work experience. Don't misrepresent it that it was paid. You can call it volunteer, but just put everything in a reverse chronological format. Let the recruiter just start reading it in a way that they're expecting to read it. When it's done in a jumbled way, it just honestly pisses the recruiter off. They're trying to figure out what the thing is logically, and it's just not making any sense. And then they're wasting time in evaluating you on stuff that really shouldn't matter, but you're making it matter by making them work for it. So just do it the way you would normally do it. If you have a bunch of short-term jobs, group them together so you have one employment experience maybe, so it doesn't look jumpy. There's tactics you can do to do that, but I would use your volunteer, your whatever at home experience, anything like that. I would just use it in a reverse chronological format so it seems expected and normal.
So Alex chimed in, has the format of the current resume changed, like with adding graphics to it or other things? Just because you've seen a lot of things over the years, so I'd appreciate, kind of that perspective.
I think generally speaking, I subscribe to the mentality, and I'm like this in a lot of areas of my life, as well as the job search, as well as the resume. It's just simple is probably usually the most effective. I think when hiring managers and recruiters are going through, anywhere from 50 to 100 resumes a day, their eyes get used to going in certain places looking for information. So being different on a resume and when you take everything out of the expected places, I think has an adverse effect. Being creative within the confines of where a recruiter expects to see information, I think is where you make the most impact. don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. I mean, and Ned says it's a red flag that you're hiding something on a functional resume.
Yeah.
And I know from my experience when I was working with people who are out for a really long time, they wanted to use a functional resume to hide that, and you're going to be found out no matter what.
I mean, it's the thing, like, and believe me, I know the reason for people doing it is because there are hiring managers, recruiters, companies, networking sources, like people, right? Human beings that do the wrong thing. They judge when you've been out of work for 18 months. They judge when you've been home with your kids for, 6 years, right? And that's as a man or as a woman, because my husband was home with our kids for 6 years. And I could tell you, he has some stories to tell about being a stay-at-home dad and the judgment people had about him being home. That would be a good show, actually. I had like a Girl Scout leader think that I was dead because he was a Girl Scout leader for our kids, because why else would a guy be a Girl Scout leader? His wife must be.
I'll tell a funny story.
Like, no, I'm right here, So, there's people make assumptions, and I get the reason behind wanting a functional resume, but in addition to, some of the reasons that, Annette and Alex and others have put in the chat, and some that I've mentioned otherwise earlier, functional resume doesn't really get digested into an ATS very well either. There's the pragmatic part of it. I actually have an article that I wrote back in 2013 that still stands the test of time today. If you Google functional resumes, chameleon resumes, and chameleon resumes being one word, because that'll be our website, you'll come up to the article that says functional resumes suck. 3 reasons why functional resumes suck. I put my little jersey in there, and it discusses a few of these. And one actually I don't think we've mentioned, that if I'm not mistaken, but the ATS, the fact that recruiters think you're hiding something, and I know there's a third, but I can't remember. But anyway, that might be something to look up. But they just don't really work. And people can say to me that I'm going to pay you for it, and I'm like, you can't pay me to write that, because I just know, generally speaking, they don't typically work. Now, there's always, cases where it worked for people, but generally speaking, they don't work, especially if you're going for corporate roles.
So David Shuckman, our fellow Breakfast Club member here, how about the hybrid format resume? The top is functional, highlighting key skills. The experience section is chronological.
That's a great question. I think the key is the summary should really never be more than a third of the page, the top third of the page. If you have a summary that is like the whole first page, you basically have a functional resume, and it's not going to work. You really need to have the kapow and make it easy for the recruiter. Like by the middle, by the beginning, that part has to be above the middle of the first page. Like that hook of why they should keep reading needs to happen before they scroll to the second half of the page. And recruiters want to know what job you're going for, where do you work, what your current title is, and then they go to the last page, which is typically for most people the second page, where you went to school. That's where they look. So the more you dance around with like fancy, graphics and boxes and, long, lengthy, subjective descriptions about yourself, you're just delaying them getting what they need, and it starts to have a negative effect. So really, you do what you need to do to make it, hybrid, but I would never really make that top summary more than a third of the page. There's always exceptions to every statement I'm saying here, but you need to keep the reader interested in like 6 to 15 second increments. All those articles about a recruiter only spends 6 seconds on a resume or 15 seconds on a resume. I don't think those articles are super clear. It's an attention grabbing thing. You need to keep their attention for 6 to 15 seconds, depending on the study. So they're motivated to continue reading for another 6 to 15 seconds. And you need to keep doing that to get them to the bottom of your document and or getting them to call you, right? Whichever comes first. So that's the key, is you need to keep it's like a website, right? You need to catch their attention to motivate them to keep scrolling.
So for people over 50, how relevant is a college degree earned 30 years ago?
I think that the famous answer of it depends, right? Because it depends on what you do, right? It depends on what you're going for. Your relevancy, recent and relevancy is what recent experience and relevancy is what trumps everything, right? So now, if you're in marketing or you're in sales and you need to show that you have this robust network, if you went to a school that has a robust alumni network and you show that you have the evidence of tapping that network where it produces revenue for a company, then maybe where you go to school matters, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean Ivy League or the top whatever that's defined as. It could who are they trying to target and where do you come from? Maybe that school then will matter, right? But if it's a trade type of role, like my husband's in construction,
Mhm.
I don't know how much certain degrees don't necessarily apply. If he had an engineering degree, it might apply, but he doesn't, and he's still exceptional at it. So I think it just depends
Mhm.
on what you're doing. And, I would want my surgeon to have degrees, you know? So I just think it depends.
So this is kind of what we were alluding to before. What happens when someone's out of the workforce for several years due to taking care of children they want to re-enter? What type of resume? If a chronological resume is used, 10 years of taking care of is not considered full-time work. I mean, I'm going to give my 2 cents here.
Yeah, feel free.
I think a lot of when you're out of work for that amount of time, yes, you're doing things that could be very relevant skills-wise to your next job.
Mhm.
And I think people may miss the boat about that. I don't know how an employer or a hiring manager is going to look at someone with 10 years of experience or 8 years of experience not in the workforce. This is just me suggesting you want to make good use of your skills. And I think that's where the whole functional resume, chronological resume discussion really comes in.
I mean, I could tell you that my most extreme gap, right, that I had a mom who did writing and was an editor, a magazine editor, and
Mhm.
then she left to be home with her 3 kids. She was an at-home mom for 17 years, and she, she did some freelance editing work, but it wasn't a full-time gig. It
Mhm.
wasn't consistent either. It was very random, just things that came her way because of people she met. Um, you know, the she also, did like the PTA and she would do the marketing pieces or she would do the membership and show then, how she got people to join things or events that we did, together and things like that. It's somebody from my town. And this was, and I've done a number of these types of transitions, but this was the most extreme. And we positioned her document to show where she used marketing skills in her stay-at-home mom phase.
Right.
And we showed where, we showcased the small little freelance job she had as well. But we just, I have to tell you, I mean, there's websites about hiring parents,
Mhm.
like, and um, there's websites for it because people know that like parents that are home, obviously mostly moms, there's like, we know how. I'm a mom of 2 kids. We know how to do because we have no choice. We know how to get like what normally would be like a 2-hour assignment done in like 45 minutes, right? Because that's all we got. And it's still really good. So people know that at-home parents are an amazing source of, labor. So it's just a matter of packaging it and then
Mhm.
using the fact that you are an at-home parent, explicitly saying you're an at-home parent looking to get back into the workforce on the document explains why there's a gap,
Right. I mean,
you
again,
know?
you can
And
hire.
and
I like.
so, I mean, generally speaking, that's a lot of the stuff. Those are some tactics that we use.
I like to
And
call.
anyway, to tell you, she wound up getting an editor job,
Uh-huh.
not a staff job, an editor job, getting back into the work. She basically left and came in at the same level she was at 17 years later.
So one of the common things that happens now is people are changing careers
Mhm.
for whatever the reason is. So, I mean, there are some that are probably more drastic than others,
Right.
but what are some of the general approaches that you might suggest, either from a resume perspective or just even knowing if if it makes sense to do that career pivot in the first place? Because just
Right.
because I think that's the first step. Is it something I'd really be good at, or would it be worth my while to do it?
I mean, I think to evaluate if you would be good at it or if it'd be worthwhile or if it's going to pay you enough, right? Sometimes you think it's going to be enough and then you don't know. Is I would personally use LinkedIn. I would find like 30 people that are doing that job, or 30 people, if it's possible, who even have done that transition. You may take you a little bit more clicking to find those people, and I would send out messages and try to talk to as many as I can to just say, like, how'd you do it? What would you recommend? What didn't you expect? And just ask those questions. If you send out like 30 or 40 of those requests, if you get like 6 people to text you back and say, I'll talk to you, you're doing great, right? You just need a few to talk to get an idea. In addition to looking on LinkedIn for people, even if you don't talk to them, you'll get an idea who made this transition. If you're not finding anybody who made this transition, that might be some evidence for you right there, right? And then if it is something you want to pursue, I would look at transferable skills that you have and highlight those and highlight the achievements that show you doing those skills well. And then weave into your story how your background from a different industry can now give you this additional perspective that maybe somebody coming from within the industry doesn't have. So it's then you're viewing your experience as an asset. And I think that's almost like a 3-step way of doing it. Like, I mean, for me, to be honest, like when I was in high school, I went to an all-girl Catholic high school, and the nuns thought I was great at math and science. So they're like, you should go into engineering. I'm like, okay. I didn't even know what that was, right? So I went to college, and when I got into college, I went as an engineer. I lasted like 3 weeks before I'm like, I got to get out of here. So I started applying to transfer because I went to Cornell. I wasn't leaving Cornell. And, I was going to graduate from Cornell with a basket weaving degree if I had to. Like, I wasn't leaving Cornell. And my roommate was a hotel major. So I'm like, oh, I can do that because I waited tables in a pizzeria in high school. I can do that. And so, long story short, I got in and I thought I would be an engineer, but in the hospitality business. And I would design restaurants and design hotels and HVAC systems and things like that. And then I wound up wanting to work in hotels and restaurants more so I can design them better. But then I loved the hotel business and the restaurant business. So I never got to design anything. And I just and after I graduated, I worked at Four Seasons in San Francisco, and I worked at Pebble Beach. And my boss at Pebble Beach said to me I told her I was coming back to New York. She said to me, you would be a great recruiter. I didn't even know what that was. But I listened to this woman because I thought she was great. And I came back to New York and I became a recruiter because, that's linear and makes sense, right? But I could tell you that my analytical brain from the engineering phase, my hospitality driven mindset weaves into how we do things at Chameleon, right? At my company. So it all plays into where I'm at today. And I recruited them for 13 years. So like it all tells the story, why we're so good at what we do today and why I love what I do today and how I go about doing it. So it's just a matter of weaving your story together, no matter how disjointed or random it may seem. And I'm as random as they come, in my opinion, but it all does make sense and it does translate into why we're good at what we do.
Thanks. I mean, the other question I get a lot of, and it's another it depends question, I guess, is
right.
How many pages should a resume be?
Yeah, I mean, I think and again, these are all general rules. There's always exceptions to every rule, but I think if you have under 10 years of experience, if a page is working for you, then do a page. If you have over 10 years experience, don't cram everything onto a page, like especially if you have 25 years of experience, right? I don't think most people need more than 2 pages. Have I written resumes that are more than 2 pages? Absolutely. Especially when you get into like healthcare and science, who's got a list of, patents and publications and academic ones, like those addendums can lengthen the document. But the key is, no matter what page length is right for you, I would say to follow two things. If you're spilling over to a quarter of a page, like 2 1/4, 1 1/4 page, then that just means you need to write more efficiently and get it to 1 page or 2 pages. Don't do if you can't complete a full next page, don't just make your writing tighter. And then the other thing too is to remember, just because you write it doesn't mean people are going to read it. So make sure you're adhering to keeping people motivated to continue to scroll, and make sure that, you're not just writing because you think you should have 2 pages and because everything's so important. You need to write with your reader in mind, not with what you want to be, show what you're proud of in mind. It's a combination of both. And most people just view the resume or the profile even as like a document of everything they're proud of, when they're not factoring in that this is a marketing document. And so they need to market themselves.
So Alex had a question. We select for skill and we hire for personality. If so, how do you introduce personality into the resume and LinkedIn profile?
I think there's an opportunity to put more personality into a profile than there is a resume, just by the nature of there being more characters. There's, dynamic parts to a profile. So I just think that there's more opportunity to do that on a profile. I think it also depends on your industry. Some industries are going to frown upon tons of personality coming out into things, because it's, just naturally a very pragmatic type of, profession or industry. So, I mean, you got to and then there's just someone's comfort level, right? So, and then there's some jobs that really should be, adhering to security or privacy. And so being so out there sends a completely opposite message, right? Subliminally. So I think based on all that, using, I think ultimately people want to know that, especially as a leader, that you attract talent and people want to work for you, right? So if you can demonstrate achievements, no matter what your profession is, that you are either training people and then how successful that training is, are you mentoring people and are they going on to advanced positions, how you attract talent, hire the talent, and retain the talent. I think if you can include those achievements in 1 or 2 bullets throughout your document, again, no matter what your profession is, no matter what level you are, that will subliminally send a message that people like to work with you. And that's ultimately, because you can't say people like to work with me. It really comes down to, do you get results from people liking you, right? Because Lord knows we all know nice people who can't get anything done, right? So it's about, does your likability generate results? And I would say in a resume, the way to subliminally send the message that people like to work with you is by showing you what makes some of your achievements, what happens with people around you, and don't make it all about what you do.
So this is another common thing. When you have a lot of experience, is there a limit to how far back you should go on your resume? One of the things which, because I have a lot of experience too, is I usually bullet point some of the older experience just as a list, because I don't want someone to think I only have 10 years experience, but at the same time, what I did 20 years ago isn't necessarily relevant to what I did now, but you don't want to lose track of it. So I'd just be curious to know what your thoughts are.
No, I think that I think you bring up an excellent point, right? It's not about hiding it, right? And you don't need people to be distracted by the fact that, they thought you were 35 and you're not when you show up to the Zoom or the in-person interview. And not that that should matter, but if you are leaving one impression and the impression's different, that's all that people spend the next few minutes of. It's like going on a date, right? If you use the wrong picture and then you show up and it's, you use the Adonis picture and you got the belly when you show up, then everybody's going to be focused on the fact that you used the wrong picture. There's nothing wrong with having a belly, but then don't, so with that said, right, be who you are. But I think that a tactic you mentioned about just sort of summarizing previous experience, I think is helpful. Choose to use maybe only the company names. If you were raised in some awesome pedigree companies, you definitely don't want to lose that, right? Because it shows where you came from, who you were trained under, certain methodologies that maybe are important. Somebody might look for somebody who comes out of X company because they know how you were trained. So you don't want to lose that. So sometimes you want to show that. So I would highlight the company if that's going to be the best sales point of it. Maybe What's most important is the type of positions you had to show that, you understand what it's like to be on the line. Maybe in a career pivot, showing that you came from, like, in my case, right? Showing that I come from a hospitality background. I can say, well, I do everything with this hospitality perspective. So I'm going to put the places that I worked if it matters, right? If that's important to the company, knowing that I'm not at a hospitality company now, right? So, but I think the mistake some people make is, especially if they're doing a career pivot, maybe they want to go back to something they used to do. And it's something they did like 15 or 20 years ago, right? The mistake people make is sometimes they try to market themselves based on what that experience was 10, 15 years ago, when you might want to mention in a tactic you suggested, prior experience, and mention the fact that you were at this company, that's in the place where they want to go. But you're better to focus on your transferable experience that's current and make the pivot from there than say, I'm qualified because I did this 20 years ago. Because Lord knows everything's different now, 20 years later, even if there's certain things that aren't, right? Because certain things aren't, right? But if you tell somebody your industry hasn't changed in 20 years, I could still do it, they're going to be like, you're full of it. So you can't, you got to play that game a little bit, that it's more about your transferable experiences that make you qualified to pivot back into that profession or industry than say, I did this 20 years ago and that's why I'm qualified. That's a perk that you were in it.
Mm-hmm.
You maybe put it in a previous experience section that has no dates with it, like you mentioned, but it's just a matter of the strategy.
So the other thing that comes up a lot in different calls is with a resume, what size should the type be? What font should it be to make it readable? Because I've seen some resumes that are all over the place, and they may look good for certain situations, but from a document standpoint, they're not easy to follow. So is there anything you might recommend?
I think people need to look at their resume on a desktop. If they have a tablet, look at a tablet. Look on a phone. Look at their profile on mobile, look at their profile on a desktop. They got to look at it in different ways. Look at it as a Word document, look at it as a PDF on those different platforms too. So, it's a lot of work, right? But, and don't get hung up on it being perfect in any of those platforms. Like if you open it up on mobile and like a box is a little off kilter, but you can still read it, I could tell you recruiters are used to that. I've hired more people that when I was recruiting, that the resume was a jumbled mess sometimes, but as long as I can make do, and believe me, if my fee was dependent on that person having the goods and I just had to read through a terribly laid out resume, I still was going to call the person and then I would just help them with the resume before I submitted it to my client. But which is why I was really good at resumes. but so don't get hung up on the little things. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try to clean it up in any of those platforms, but there's not one way to write a resume that will work universally with every ATS on every platform. It just it doesn't exist. So it's more about, is the document readable on most platforms? And when it's not readable, I shouldn't say when it's not readable. You never want it not readable. When it's a little jumbled, can you still get the vibe? Right? And if the answer is yes, don't spend your time getting it from 92% great to 98. You know what I mean? Because it's just a waste of time, diminishing returns. I feel like I'm not answering your question because I got
No, that's okay.
Can we answer Nancy's contract?
Well, I just put that up here. If you work a contract,
this literally is like near and dear to my heart, this question. I'm so glad you asked this question, Nancy. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Why don't you read it out loud, I guess?
Yeah, if you work a contract to hire job first for a consulting company, then as a permanent employee at the client, should you list the time you work through the consulting company and the time you work directly for the company as two separate items on your resume?
This is a great question. All right. So first of all, a shout out to all my contractor people out there, because I think when I recruited, a large part of my recruiting experience was managing, when I started anyway, was managing a contract desk, placing temps and high-level consultants into jobs that were like, 6 months, 9 months, before the law changed, even sometimes over a year, right? And contractors get a bad rap because when people see that you did 3 contract jobs in a row, they go, oh my God, that person can't keep a job because they had 3 contract jobs in a row. Or they go temp to hire. And then because you break it out into 2 employers, they view it as like, oh, you had 2 short-term jobs. Like, and first of all, there's no one more loyal than a consistent contract employee, because they will finish the end of the assignment, 6, 9 months, however long it is. And to finish the end of that assignment, they forego their own interviewing and their own career advancement to keep to their word, to keep to the end of the assignment. And often they can't time landing another job with the end of that assignment, especially if the end of the assignment comes at a time that they're not expecting. So that's why they have gaps. And so what they do then is they take the next contract assignment. And if somebody can last in a job for 9 months as a temp or contractor, it means they're awesome. And they're not unable to hold down a job, right? So that's just a little plug for my contract people. And for any recruiter that's watching, to give them all a shot, because there's nobody better, in my opinion, or more loyal. But so with that said, back to Nancy's question, again, it depends, right? So if you've been like a 10-month contractor, right? Or you were there 10 months and they laid you off for a month to, or a month or 2 to keep the law, intact, that you can't be in a contract, for more than a year or something like that. And they bring you back. So you're almost there 2 years and then they bring you on perm or something like that. You almost need to break it out as 2 separate employment experiences, but I would link them with words. I would put, like, if you're at IBM through Randstad, and I'm just using that as an example, I would put IBM, through, and in parentheses, I would put contractor through Randstad, or went full-time from Randstad, or make it like the first bullet, converted into a full-time employee after 2-year stint through Randstad. Like, connect the dots. And then when you list the Randstad experience, you want to make sure that you put Randstad and then in parentheses put at IBM client. Like, so let the reader see that you were there under 2 different employment names, but you were still in the same location. So I would just be explicit about how you outline it so it's clear. And you can put it under 1 date range and maybe put both of them, almost the way you would handle a promotion, so you can show that you were in the same location for for the whole entire period, but you're breaking it out between the part you were the perm employee at IBM and the temp employee that before that you went perm at through the agency.
So just as a reminder, this is all being recorded. So if you missed anything, you can follow up later on. So Christine, you work mostly with executives. Are resumes set up differently for different levels of positions?
That's a great question. So most of our senior level clients refer us their professional level spouses and friends, and we get their adult children who just graduated college all the time. So I don't market for it, but we get referred those individuals all the time because people trust us with their family and with their friends and their coworkers, and everybody's not an executive, right? So a lot of things are similar, except, if somebody's graduating college, or that's a big difference, which, I think most people do see, is that the college degree will be up top, right? And not versus once you have a year or 2 experience, the college degree should be at the bottom of the resume. So, there's definitely some fundamental differences, but you still got to grab the attention of the reader. You still got to showcase recent relevant experience. You need to show, I think when you're doing a younger person's resume who's just starting out somewhere, you typically need to showcase how they're trainable and show, in their achievements, how they learned things, how they adopted training, how they were intuitive on certain things. But that same skill set can also be used for somebody who's older and doing a career pivot, right? It's transferable skills, it's trainability, it's, showing that they made something out of nothing, right? So I feel like so much of these tactics can happen at any level, and they can happen in many different professions and industries. So it's really about assessing what the person is trying to tackle, what they're trying to accomplish, and then coming up with the plan and the marketing documents and the outreach plan for them to land it. It's a, there's differences and there's not differences. It just depends. And then there's writers. I know what we're good at, and I also know where I know if I refer them somewhere else, somebody is a better writer than me for that. So I think nobody's good at everything, but at the same time, similar tactics are used at different levels. It just depends.
So, what's the thinking of cover letters these days?
I was a recruiter who never read cover letters.
Okay.
Right. Despite me selling them as one of the services that I do. Sounds like a hypocrite, but that's, the bottom line is it's a tool, right? It's a tool. Some recruiters, hiring managers like them. Some recruiters, hiring managers don't. The key is if you need that tool to have it where it's a good tool, right? So it's like a suit. Some companies are going to want to see you, whether it's a Zoom or in person, they're going to want to see you interview in a suit. Can you do the job without the suit? Of course you can. Can you do the job without a cover letter? Of course you can. The key is, though, to have the best one available that works for you based on if somebody actually values that, who's making a decision. I think the key, though, is the mistake people make is they make their resume dependent on the cover letter in order for the meaning to be conveyed, like maybe why they have a gap or what job they're going for. And that's a mistake because cover letters often get separated from resumes, or you run into a recruiter like me who doesn't read them. So that resume needs to be able to stand on its own. If it's separated from the cover letter in an applicant tracking system, if the person who you forwarded your resume and cover letter to only forwards on the resume to the next person, a myriad of reasons, right? Like they look in the ATS, it actually all got categorized properly, but the person who's reading it doesn't read the cover letter. I mean, there's just hundreds of reasons why those documents can get separated. So your resume needs to be designed where it could stand alone, convey what you're looking for, convey maybe why there's a gap or something that is not linear. And the resume needs to be able to do that all by itself. And the cover letter should just further explain or reiterate your interest.
So tell them about eliminate the no, Lisa. And that one.
I saw Annette mention this a couple of times. She's like, say the no. So, and not every recruiter thinks this way, but there's recruiters, HR people where and I'd say, and again, not every recruiter is like this or HR person, but there are people who do this. They're looking at documents, they're getting inundated. You know what I mean? And the first pass or first screen, so to speak, is they're looking for the people who they absolutely can't interview. They're looking for the no. Oh, I can't interview this one because they don't have this. I can't interview this one because I have too much of that, or da da da. And I don't mean too much experience, but I just, I don't mean anything illegal. So the recruiters are looking for the no to whittle down that pile. And then they have the pile left, and then they start looking at who's the best to bring in for the interview, right? So you need to design the resume to eliminate the no, right? What's the first thing they're going to ding me for? What's the, so like if you're worried about ageism, don't lead with 20 years of experience. I mean, yeah, it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right, but so whatever you think your thing is, design the document to eliminate it or reduce the concern for it. So they can they can just spend the time on why you're the yes to at least get that first pass.
So, I mean,
Thanks, Annette.
What?
Saying thank you, Annette. She's the one who pushed for that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the other thing as a follow-up, Christine wanted to know about the discussions that you were having before about the differences with the resumes. I mean, and it's a general question, has anything changed now with the great quote unquote resignation with the whole process, job search process, or is this?
I mean, you definitely want to add that, if you're doing remote work, that how you're successful in a remote work setting. I think it's less about the great resignation and more about like what skills now, frankly, should have been there all along. And good companies were valuing this all along, but the, pandemic just sort of like blew this up all out of the water that it needed to be now noticed by everybody. How you manage talent is huge, right? How you attract, retain, and develop talent. Not as an HR person. I mean, you're a CFO, if you're a VP of IT, if you're a product manager, you need to have a talent bullet in your resume of some kind, because you're either training people, you're working with people, you're cultivating people, you need to attract people. You need to show how people want to work with you and how you cultivate a team around you, either as a teammate or as a manager. So I'd say everyone needs to have some sort of people-driven bullet. How you handle crisis management needs to now be addressed. I think, again, it's not just the CHRO and the CEO and everybody with a C that's doing the crisis management. I mean, Lord knows everybody in the field is managing crises every day. So everybody needs to have some crisis management experience listed. I think it's important to show not just forecasting ability, but pivoting ability, right? Because you can't forecast every scenario that's happened. If we haven't learned anything from this year, it's that, right? So how do you pivot successfully, or how do you fail fast when you realize it's not working? I think, you don't necessarily want to brag about the failures you've had, but I think showing, or at least being prepared on an interview to talk about them in a pragmatic way, I think will make you come across like a real person. I'm telling you, most recruiters, hiring managers, senior level leaders are suspect when when someone has no negatives to talk about, when they don't have any things that didn't work out on a resume, on an interview, because it's not true. So again, it goes back to what else are you hiding, right? So the more diplomatically vulnerable you can be, right? You don't need to use it as a therapy session, but like the more diplomatically vulnerable you are with your hiring manager, I think you just come across as somebody who will then be diplomatically vulnerable when there's a problem at work. And it implies that you're trustworthy and you're somebody whose information can be dependent upon. So handling that in a resume, a profile, an interview question, I think is important. And that's vulnerability, diplomatic, vulnerability, I think is important nowadays more than ever. I've been talking about that for years, but I think it's just really important now because we're all, if humanity has literally become from the forefront, and work now supports life. Whereas I think before the pandemic, the system was broken for a long time, and work, life supported work for most people. And frankly, it wasn't working for a long time. And so the answers and the bullets and the stories and everything that comes across where you're still achieving things, but still managing, having work support life, but that doesn't mean work's on the back burner. When you convey that message, you come across as a balanced, healthy person who has things in perspective and who's productive. And that's typically, I think, all things being equal, the person who will win the interview.
So this was a great conversation, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope we can have you back again sometime.
I would love to. This is great. Thank you so much.
Is there anything any events coming up or anything you wanted to share with the group, things that they should know about?
Anyone can reach me, through LinkedIn. You can message me or follow me there. I'm doing a session on ageism with Andrew Seaman next week. You can message me for the invite on that if it's not somewhere. I'm sure it's somewhere.
Where is that? Is that a Zoom thing or?
It's going to be a StreamYard thing.
A StreamYard thing.
Yeah, with Career Talks.
Okay.
So, and excited about that. And my website's chameleonresumes.com and joblandingacademy.com. It's where we house all of our DIY materials and coursework. So.
Well, thank you guys very much for attending today.
Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to Alex, right, for putting us together.
Yes, definitely. All right, thanks a lot. Have a great day, everyone.